Good evening to everyone joining us for our training series, Mobilize the Refugee Vote. My name is Stephanie Stevens, and I'm the campaign manager for We Are All America, housed at the National Partnership for New Americans. The We Are All America campaign was established in 2017 in response to the urgent need to bring together refugee resettlement, immigrant rights, and faith-based groups to reclaim public support for policies and practices that welcome and protect those seeking freedom, safety, and refuge in the United States. Leading the campaign are the organizations listed on your screen. For tools and resources associated with today's webinar, go to weareallusa.org. Point your browser toward the Take Action drop-down menu, Mobilize the Refugee Vote, or you can simply click Take Action from the front page of the website. We'll be uploading resources as they become available throughout the series.
Hello, my name is Nancy Flores, and I'm the Deputy Director at the National Partnership for New Americans. Immigrants and refugees have come under sharp attack since the rise of xenophobic rhetoric and policies. Instead of being afraid, we've responded by becoming U.S. citizens in record numbers. Over the last 6 years, nearly 5 million new citizens have naturalized and will be eligible to vote in this year's presidential election, and many of you for the first time. This critical trend stands to fundamentally change the power and recognition of the rising new American electorate. Today, naturalized citizens are 1 in 10 eligible voters in the United States. This shows a doubling of the immigrant electorate since the year 2000. Our research shows that naturalized citizens are not just growing in traditional port of entry states, but also in battleground states such as Pennsylvania, Ohio, here in Wisconsin, among others. One of our New American Voters 2020 campaign strategies has focused on uplifting local data on new Americans. What we've learned is quite powerful. In Pennsylvania, newly naturalized citizens are estimated to be 3 times larger than the 2016 presidential margin of victory. In Arizona, approximately 1/5 of the state's 394,000 naturalized citizens became citizens in recent years, and many will be first-time voters. And in Wisconsin, the number of naturalized citizens now exceeds the 2016 presidential margin of victory. I encourage you to read these state profiles. We have them up on the website for Pennsylvania, Florida, Wisconsin, Arizona, and North Carolina. To read them, you can visit newamericanvoters2020.org/reports. Stay tuned, and we'll be releasing more profiles on that link for the states of Ohio, Colorado, New Mexico, and Michigan. I want to thank all of the NPNA members that joined us and collaborated to produce these state reports. These are the Pennsylvania Immigrant and Citizenship Coalition, PIC, the Florida Immigrant Coalition, FLIC, Voces de la Frontera here in Wisconsin, Promise, Arizona, the Latin American Coalition in North Carolina, Global Cleveland in Ohio, the Colorado Immigrant and Refugee Coalition, CIRC, Somos un Pueblo Unido, and El Centro de Derechos e Igualdad in New Mexico. Thank you again for your collaboration on these reports, on this campaign, and really uplifting new Americans in this election. And remember, now that we've naturalized, we must vote.
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Nada Sumik with the We Are All America campaign. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's workshop on voting during COVID times. So this section of our workshop is part of our Q&A session, and we have some amazing speakers lined up today, this evening. But before we start our Q&A session, I'm going to pass it on to our campaign manager, Stephanie Stevens, where she will provide some information on voting during COVID times. So Stephanie, I'm passing it on to you.
Thank you, Nada, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, part of our Mobilize the Refugee Vote series. We wanted to let you know a little bit about what's happening with voting across the country. And I am going to share the New American Voters page. It's newamericanvoters2020.org. And I will show you this page from the National Partnership for New Americans. And on this page, you'll see a big map right on the front. And this really outlines what's happening in each one of these states around voter registration and voting. As you can imagine, with this year being COVID, things are not usual, but even in a usual year, election administration in the United States is highly decentralized. And what that means is that no two states actually do voting in the same way. There's a lot of variety from one state to the next. There are many, many ways to cast your ballot. It's not all the same. You can, in the states which allow by mail or absentee, there's also states that have in-person voting, election day voting, and basically there's 4 categories this year. You can look at this map and see. The first states are the ones in red, and those are universal distribution of ballots by mail. So every single voter in those states will be mailed their ballot before election day. There's a lot of different options on how they return it though. Many folks will mail in their ballots, but some actually allow drop boxes or to go to your elections office and drop it off, or even to drop it off at a polling place. So it's really important to know what your state's requirements are, even if you do get a ballot in the mail, and make sure that you have it postmarked in time as well. These states, the red states, are really the gold standard in administering elections during COVID. So there are also 25 states, which are the states there in green. And these are states where individuals are able to cast a ballot by mail, by absentee voting, without an excuse. And the difference here is that these states are not going to have ballots mailed automatically to them, right? The voter has to request one. Some states will administer this by sending all registered voters a request form. In other states, you have to ask for them and fill them out. So in some places you can do this online, and in other states you have to actually call the elections office or get a hold of them to get your ballot. And there's a lot of folks that are going to be doing this in a new way for the first time. Interestingly, in Arizona, you can request a permanent early ballot, and in Arizona, about 80% of folks cast their ballot by mail. So once you request it, you can say you want it to be permanently sent to you, and then you never have to ask for it again. In Florida, 31% casted their ballots before election day in the last election, so it's also very, very popular in Florida as well. The third grouping there that you'll see are the states that do allow some COVID excused, well, they've traditionally required an excuse, let's just say, for you to receive an absentee ballot, but this year they're saying COVID is an adequate excuse. And there are a handful of states that we do worry about where COVID is not an acceptable excuse. So we do expect a lot of early and absentee balloting this year. In 2016 and 2018, nearly half of the electorate cast a mail-in ballot, an absentee ballot, or some other kind of early voting before election day. And because of long lines, social distancing, and many, many more issues this year, we'll probably see that a lot more this year. So we are encouraging it, and we think it's a good way to keep people safe during COVID. So that's a little bit of an overview. And if you click on any one of these states, so for example, in Oregon, it gives you the voter registration deadline and how to register to vote. And then also, if there are organizations that are serving immigrants and refugees in that state, on the newamericanvoters2020.org, you'll also see the organization listed here, which can help you out. So we hope that that gives you some indication of the many, many ways that people are able to cast their ballots this year. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was very, very useful information, especially that you can scroll under and see the deadlines for voting. Very, very useful. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so now we're going to start with our Q&A session, and just want to send a nice warm welcome to all of our speakers, and thank you for joining us tonight. And we're going to start off with the other Stephanie Wall with Florida Immigrant Coalition. Welcome, and thank you for being here. So if you want to, Stephanie, share with us a little bit about talking about safety at the polls and voter registration. So my first question for you is, can you tell us a little bit about Florida Immigrant Coalition, what you are doing to help keep voters safe at the polls?
Sure. So thank you for having me. Just as a quick cap, the Florida Immigrant Coalition is a statewide coalition of over 60 member organizations, and we work together to protect our communities through services, expand rights and freedoms through campaigns that are typically led by directly impacted folks, and then we also want to expand the electorate, at least an active and conscious electorate, and we want to protect that. So with that, we joined a larger table called the Florida for All Education Fund, where we want to empower folks to go to the polls. And empowerment also looks like safety at the polls and ensuring that their voting is protected. So our voter protection program will include recruiting for poll workers, which I'm sure many of you know we're at shortage of this year, but we're also recruiting and training poll monitors and what we're calling guardians of democracy. So what these folks will do is that typically poll workers are inside of the polling sites protecting folks. They're trained by the supervisor of elections office, but these poll monitors that we're recruiting in 10 different counties will be outside of the polling locations, day of voting, and then of course, if anyone gets harassed, intimidated, turned away at the polls, and this could be for any reason, folks can be harassing them based on the way they look, based on their ability to speak the language, then we ensure that people are there outside of the polls to report the case and then to follow up with them to ensure that they have alternatives for voting if they are truly registered to vote. And then our guardians of democracy ensure an added layer of voter protection with early voting sites. So in Florida, we have several early voting sites, which is incredible because it gives folks more options, particularly in COVID, where we're expecting a lot of folks to look towards these locations. However, you cannot go to an early voting site day of voting, election day. So we will have guardians of democracy at early voting sites, redirecting folks with a help desk, ensuring that folks go to their proper location to go vote. So it's an ambitious project. I will say we're recruiting about 1,000 poll monitors statewide in these 10 different counties and over 300 guardians of democracy to be a part of these kind of help desks at early voting sites. But we're doing it because we truly believe in ensuring that folks feel safe when they go vote. And that can look via health and then also via personally, so they don't get intimidated when they arrive at the polls.
Wow, that is wonderful. And I love that, Guardians of Democracy. Very, very awesome. What would you say, thinking back to the primaries, what were the lessons that you feel like were learned from the primaries that you're using now in the general elections? And also, if you can talk a little bit about what are some concerns that refugee and immigrants are sharing with you this year during this election?
Thank you. Some of the concerns that were brought up that we're learning from is the confusion with vote by mail. There's a lot of misinformation going on around that. Vote by mail is safe. We just need to ensure that folks send their ballots in on time or request their ballots on time. In the state of Florida, you have to request the ballot for every 2 years if you request vote by mail. So ensuring that folks have that proper voter education because they miss deadlines because we don't have enough information on that there. And then again, making sure that if you haven't sent your vote by mail on time or you drop it off at a box, then you look at alternatives. And then of course, we did have some intimidation at the polls. So that's why we're cranking up some of that recruitment to ensure that folks are at the polls to protect people and they don't feel as if they're going to be harassed for going to the polls. So part of the reason why we're doing this massive project is because we've learned that from the primaries. And again, one of the biggest push is around voter education, which is so key. A lot of folks, they get confused by the ballots. We're not just looking at the top tier item. Every single office or folks or candidate that is running is important. So we want folks to feel encouraged and have that autonomy to do the research and to feel very confident when they cast their ballot.
That is so important. I feel like that is very critical as far as voter education, right? I think that's really key. Thank you so much for that information, Stephanie. Very insightful. Next, I would like to invite Casey Jama from Unite Oregon to talk to us a little bit about the lessons learned from Oregon. Casey, can you tell us a little bit about your work and what are some lessons we can learn from your state? And if you can particularly also touch on vote by mail process in your state and what that looks like.
Hey everyone, Casey Chama, Executive Director of United Oregon. So to respond to your question, Naira, I think United Oregon, for example, we started engaging the immigrant refugee community more than 20 years ago. Oregon is, as you said, it's a vote by mail state, we also do have a ballot initiative system where citizen-driven ballot initiatives can be submitted to the voters and people can vote up and down through the ballot through that process. And that ballot initiative system is very complicated and difficult. So at the beginning, when we started our voter engagement process, mainly we were targeting making sure, first of all, immigrant refugee community members are registered to vote. And we were doing a lot of voter registration, and some of the places that we did was on the streets, train stations, supermarkets, in front of supermarkets. Those are some of the areas that we didn't register people to vote. And then later on, we were able to establish a partnership with the USCIS office with another two partner organization, is APANO, Asia and Pacific America Network of Oregon, and CALSA. And what used to be known CIO, now United Oregon. These three organizations come together, and we end up setting volunteers to the USCIS offices. So as soon as people take the oath to become citizens, we distribute for registration process through that system and then register them right on the spot. As we do that, we also learned a few things in the that process. One is that as we were calling people, asking them whether they were able to vote or not, we also realized that as the people were getting the mail ballot initiative, ballot system, they would get confused. So there's a list of bunch of ballot initiatives that they got it, so they don't understand. There's language barriers, so they end up not even actually voting because it's overwhelming. So through that process, what we did was we created a ballot guides where we kind of tell them people, these are ballot initiatives that really you need to pay attention to, that will impact your community. We bring them together as ballot bodies together as well. So small groups, apartments that families are sitting together, close families. We bring them together and we explain to them about through this process of ballot initiative, what the ballot guide looks like, what the issue that is being voted up and down. And that's through that process, they are kind of learning the system as we go. And then we ask them to bring their ballot itself and vote as we educate them and inform them their rights and their responsibilities. So that system process, we created a way that we can usher and support the immigrant refugee community through very concentrated efforts. The last thing I'm gonna say before I end also, I think one of the also additional strategies or tactics that we used that was effective was phone banking. So we bring multilingual volunteers with multiple languages, and for the best year we had, where we brought people who speak 8 languages: English, Spanish, Somali, Arabic, Vietnamese, Russian, and we went through that process, explain to them, call them, and help them to that process, to ask them to vote through the over the phone. So those are simple systems and tactics and strategies that we use. Oregon is very safe place to vote. Generally, we have about over 80% of the most of the time people voting who are qualified to vote. And so our voting system is very safe, but sometimes language and cultural barriers make it difficult our community to participate.
Yeah, those are some really key points that you made, Casey, particularly with the language barrier. I think that's very prevalent in refugee and immigrant communities when it comes to voting, right? And I can speak here, particularly in my state, in Arizona, we've had, you know, some of the same challenges, and it's so important to provide that access to people, right? Language access. And here in Arizona, what we've done is we've done a lot of translation on just general voter registration information, right? In languages that are prevalent for refugee and immigrant communities. And for making sure that people understand, you know, the different deadlines. It could be very confusing. And even for us who are, you know, native speakers, it could be very confusing. So I definitely agree with that. I also want to share here in Arizona, one of the things that we also did to encourage people to register to vote was we did this week we're doing a voter registration drive-through week, and where we're going specifically into different refugee and immigrant communities, and really specifically targeting businesses, refugee and immigrant-owned businesses, and community centers during hours that we know are convenient for these families and the community. And so I think it's important to really take away any kind of barriers that we can in getting people to register to vote, to understand and the information. And so I think that's really critical. So I also want to have Anahita, who is our organizer from California. I'm just going to shift gears a little bit and have her, Anahita, if you can talk a little bit about, from your perspective, and just give us some of your reflections on how keeping refugees and immigrants safe at the polls and in meaningful ways to keep them engaged, especially with so much going on. Can you share some of your insight and your reflections on that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Naira. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, especially around elections, right? It's such an important time for us this year moving forward, and we're met with a lot of hurdles, right? We're dealing with a pandemic. Here on the West Coast, we're dealing with wildfires and a whole nother set of issues that we have in front of us. And I think for us, the big thing is, right, how do we have that dialogue with our refugee and immigrant communities when it comes to mobilizing and getting out the vote. This is the first time here in California with the We Are All America campaign that we're engaging in electoral work in partnership with Chirla's Immigrant Political Power Project. So we are phone banking Iranian voters and just having some of these conversations. We're seeing what these concerns are, right? I think Stephanie mentioned this also, Casey, is the misinformation that's out there with having your mail-in ballots be counted, right? We're seeing it on the news. We're seeing it in everyday conversations on social media that your mail-in ballots may not be counted, right? And even when you have misinformation from electeds, it's hard to understand, you know, what the right way of voting and actually it being counted is. So for first-time voters like myself, I'm a first-time voter, so I'm very excited to participate in this webinar, one, and then also to talk to my colleagues, my community members or volunteers, friends and family on the importance of voting, right? So many of us, our parents, haven't had that opportunity to vote in their home countries. So for example, take my parents' home country as Iran. It is a dictatorship, right? There's a dictatorship in place. So when they do vote for a prime minister or president, it doesn't make much change in the system, right? And so here we actually have a chance to put our issues at the forefront, to make a difference in the system that we're in, right? In our democratic system. So we're really trying to engage our refugee communities through webinars. We're having weekly webinars targeted towards Arab refugee communities, Iranian, Farsi-speaking communities on the importance of becoming civically engaged, because this is something that isn't common, right, in these communities, particularly those that are coming from refugee backgrounds. And so I think having that dialogue is very important, and that our voice does matter, right? Our voice actually does make a difference in being able to cast our ballots. So here in California, we do have a number of new measures in place to make sure that that voting is safe and secure, and you can do it while being socially distant. So just for example, here in California, we're fortunate to all receive, those that are registered voters, to receive mail-in ballots. So you don't need to register for it. As long as you're a registered voter, you should receive one during the week of October 5th. And there's new safe voting methods during the pandemic here in California. So just to name a couple, for example, we have vote centers like we've had previously all over California, and you can go ahead and drop it off at a vote center with anywhere in your county. So previously it had to be somewhere that was within the vicinity of your residence, but today, to make things more simpler and safer and more accessible, you can go ahead and choose a vote center that's closer to work or school or anywhere else within the county. And so these will be available every single day, starting the 24th of October all the way to the 30th, depending on the county that you live in. And again, the deadline is November 3rd. And then to also make things easier, we have a Dropbox ballots in our counties as well. So they're kind of like mailboxes. There'll be many secure boxes across the county, and they're operating around the clock. So for folks that don't have the chance to drop by a vote center by 7 p.m., folks can go ahead and drop it off at a Dropbox around the clock. And again, you can do this all the way up until Election Day. And of course, there are in-person voting methods as well at the vote centers. And what we're telling the refugee and immigrant communities that we're speaking to is understand that there are safety measures in place. The places will be sanitized, social distancing will be enforced, but do go ahead and vote as early as possible, right? With the delays and everything else going on, we just want to encourage folks to get out there and to let them know that their voice matters, right? If we want to continue being the leader, the leading nation of welcoming refugees and immigrants, then we need to make sure that we get ourselves to the polls this year, right? So let me just stop there and just say that just in a personal sense, this is really, really important to me, because after 20 years of living in this country, this is the first time that I have a chance to vote in a presidential election. My whole family here, it's their first time also voting. And I can tell you, I have at least 10 friends that have never voted in presidential elections. And just having that conversation with them, I've gotten them to register to vote. So just, in our inner circles, we're able to organize without even knowing it. We don't have to move mountains, but if we just take small strides, we're able to move mountains at the end of the day. So start small, and we'll be able to see those differences in the years to come. So I'll go ahead and stop there, and I'll pass it back to you, Neighbor. Thank you.
Wow, Anahita, that is so inspiring and so encouraging, that you have, that opportunity that you will get to vote this election, and just, I can feel your excitement and passion. So that's amazing. And also, no excuses, right? In your state, there's quite a few options where there's vote centers in every county. There's drop boxes that are secure boxes. So no excuses, right? How many other of you panelists have, what was your experience like if you were a first-time voter? If you want to share a little bit briefly about your experience. And it's open to anyone.
I'll share that this is actually my first general election as well. So I'm excited too. I became a citizen last year, so.
Amazing, congratulations.
Yeah, it's Casey. I did become a citizen 2009, and that was my first year I participated. I was barely missed the presidential elections, but I was able to vote local and state elections, and I really, really was excited and inspired by it, just being participating. But that also led me to run for an office later on to be as a Oregon Senate, which really make me to complete the cycle, become a citizen, voting participation and allowing also helping other immigrants and refugees to participate, and then later on running for an office. So I think honestly, the last thing I'm going to say is that it's really important that immigrant refugee community members are participating and voting, because I remember I was giving a training a while back in Seattle, Washington State, and I asked the folks who were in the room at that election cycle, how many of Somali community members were in Seattle area, and they said maybe 25,000, maybe 20, maybe 18. I said, how many are registered to vote? And they said probably about maybe 10, maybe 12. And that year, the election of governor was decided on 120 votes only. And my point was that really, those of you who are in the community can really shift the power of balance and really decide who will be the next governor or next president of the United States. And that's the margin sometimes so slim that we need to make sure that our immigrant refugee community understands the power of voting and how that impacts their lives. Because sometimes, a lot of times, people assume, oh, this is, we come from countries who are so fraud in terms of voting, but they just assume that they have no place to be participating in this election or any participating. So my encouragement to them is that you could be deciding factor who's going to be the next governor or next president or who the next senator. And really that message has to be really brought home to ensure that we are participating effectively and encouraging our community to fully participate.
Wow, Casey, that is so inspiring. So not only, becoming a citizen, but then, running for office, that is just amazing. That's the type of civic engagement we need more of, right? For representation. And definitely every single vote counts. Every single voice matters in this. I want to switch it over to Basma a little bit to talk a little bit about, Basma, maybe about your experience of voting and, this election, what it means to you. And also if you can share a few words of encouragement, as a former refugee, what would you say to others who are considering voting in this election?
Yeah, hopefully all of this amazing work, leaders, organization who are leading the work will inspire us and people who are attending this webinar to vote. Today, actually, I am going to share some of my motivation. I think earlier this week, the AP News, with our help, published an article with the title, New U.S. Citizen Refugees Excited for First Presidential Election. And as some of you may know, refugees come fleeing war, persecution in countries like Myanmar, Eritrea, Iraq, handpicked by the United States. Some of the stories that was shared really inspiring, and I picked really short snip from each story because for me, that's what inspires me and keep me motivated to do the work. So, as some of you may know, refugees come to this country escaping political system where the government is the enemy of its people. Like Bilal al-Ubaidi recalls election in Iraq under Saddam Hussein when only the leader's name was on the ballot. And the only possible choice were yes or no. And if you said yes, if you said no, something bad could happen to you. And I lived that experience and it's 100% right. Or Nada al-Rubay'i, which she said that she had never voted in her native Iraq, which she fled after her oldest son and several other family members were killed in the country, widespread violence. She is a US citizen since September 2019. She said, I am so excited about the upcoming election. It is so important for a person to feel like they belong to a country. And the next person I want to share about is Habtam Bezzi, fled Eritrea after being conscripted to serve an indefined number of years in the military. Ghazi, who I spoke to, initially lived in a refugee camp in a neighboring Ethiopia before being resettled in Florida in 2012. And he said, I am ready to vote. We had no election in Eritrea, not even a constitution. And lastly, Leon Cole. He never cast a ballot in Myanmar, where election were criticized as fraudulent during decade of military rule. I feel so free to be part of the United States of America, he said. I already registered to vote and now I am waiting for my ballot. It's a really big deal. And these are their words. For us as former refugees, I feel privileged to vote. I will vote because close to 80 million displaced people worldwide, they deserve home. And I will vote for the undocumented immigrants who lived in the US and need to feel home. I will vote for my 2 Muslim daughters who I want them to be always feel welcome in their home. As former refugees, with many, we vote for our home here and there. And we refugees and former refugees have many reasons to vote. And I have shared some of mine. Hopefully you have some of you could share why you are voting in this election and how we could keep people motivated to vote, because it's really important. And 80 million displaced people might be depend on this election.
Wow, thank you so much, Basma, for your powerful words and just so inspiring. And, you know, it really makes us reflect and not take for granted this opportunity that we have here in this democracy, right? What other people, millions who are displaced, who do not have that opportunity. So thank you so much for your words. I want to pass it on briefly to Stephanie to talk a little bit about election protection before we wrap up for the evening. And Stephanie Stevens.
Okay, I was wondering, I was like, which Stephanie? There's 2 amazing Stephanies on this call. Yeah, well, I mean, I would just second what Basma said and Casey about you just never know like what the margin of victory is, right? If you look at the new American electorate, you know, all those naturalized folks who came here from other places, the number of people who've naturalized, for example, in the state of Wisconsin, like in the past 5 years, is the margin of difference between the 2 presidential candidates, right, last time. And I just want to share quickly with you, and some of you may have seen the little announcement by Nancy Flores from National Partnership for New Americans, but if you go to the New American Voters 2020.org reports, they've actually started to post state-by-state reports. So if you don't believe me about Wisconsin, you could look at the Wisconsin state profile there, open it up, and if you look through it, you'll actually see a lot more information about the state, including what the county by county, how many naturalized citizens there are, and then which part of the world they're from, right? And that is just such a great tool for folks who are looking for some more information about, you know, who I should be reaching out to and mobilizing in this election. The second thing that I wanted to say is really along the lines of your rights as a voter. I don't believe that I've ever missed an election since I turned 18. I'm a US born citizen. I could be wrong, check the voter file. But it's really important to remember that if you're in a state where you're intending to vote in person, your rights are that you can vote if you were in line before the polls close. So even if the polls close and you're still in line, don't get out of line. You need to continue standing in that line because your rights are that you're allowed to vote if you're in the line when the polls close. Secondarily, if you make a mistake on your ballot, you have the right to ask for a new ballot. You know, don't get intimidated. It's absolutely a right to do that. If the machines are down, you're absolutely able to ask for a paper ballot. It's a really good thing to do. And if you notice any funky business, because we know that's going on right now, the ACLU and a lot of different organizations are part of the Election Protection Network. It's 866 Our Vote. And for every state, you can actually report things that are happening on election day. And there's reporting hotlines in multiple languages. So they have, like for example, here they have in English, it's 866 Our Vote. You can see in Arabic, it's 844 Yalla US. So they're trying to make it so that folks can be directed to experience, you know, what's happening in the moment, right? If people are being intimidated, if folks are not getting, you know, if people are asking questions of them, if polling places are just mysteriously closed, if machines are out of order, report it. The ACLU and a bunch of lawyers are tracking this. There may be lawsuits, they may need to talk to you, and we want to make sure that every darn vote counts. So that's basically what I wanted to say.
That's very, very useful. And, you know, especially for new voters, this is really important information to know and understand your rights when it comes to voting. So thank you for that, Stephanie. All right, so to wrap it up, I have one final question, and it could be very brief, 1 to 2 sentences that you all share for all the panelists. Thinking about for those individuals that may still be hesitant, even from our refugee and immigrant communities, to vote and possibly considering not to vote, you know, in this election, regardless of what their reasoning is, what would you say, how can we encourage them to get to the polls? And really briefly, if you guys can just in a sentence or two, we'll start out with Casey Jama and then work our way back. Just briefly, can we encourage them?
I think for me, it's just making sure that there's a cultural competency and sending someone that they can relate to or same cultural background, and really tell them that your lives and our lives depend on by voting this election.
Wonderful, thank you. Basma?
Yes, actually, I did have last weekend a conversation with 2 men who actually have been in the U.S. for more than 15 or 16 years. They are Syrian immigrants, and they think the first thing that they told me that our voice not going to matter. I am not voting, even though I am registered to vote. So actually, I didn't push it, but we had a conversation, and the conversation led that one of the 2 have a sibling who has been waiting for refugee and asylum status in another country, and he wants his family to be united with him. And of course he asked me, so what I should do? And I'm like, well, you should vote, because we know that until now, as we know, every year the president decides the number of refugees that comes the following year. And actually, that's how we start the conversation. So exactly how Casey mentioned, we need to find out exactly what motivates them and how they are impacted. And from there, we drive this conversation going back to voting.
Thank you, Basma. Anahita?
Yeah, I mean, Casey and Basma said it perfectly. I think these one-on-one conversations are so important. I just spoke to an Iranian voter yesterday. We're phone banking, and he said he's not interested. He doesn't plan to vote. And we just had a 2-3 minute conversation on the importance of voting and why our voice matters, since we have our ancestors, our parents and grandparents didn't have the same opportunities. And, just, kind of hitting it where it matters to them. Like Basma mentioned, what motivates them, what do they care about, and trying to bring that up in the little time that you have. But I do encourage one-on-one conversations with the folks around you.
Great, thank you. Stephanie Wall?
Thank you. I mean, I continue to echo what everyone mentioned, but also, I mean, our lives truly depend on it. And when we say our, we mean everyone. You could be a woman, you could be part of the LGBTQ community, you could be in the faith, you could be a worker. Your rights really depend on this, and for a lot of us, our lives as well. And it's about our families, our communities. It's also about our planet. So if you want to reclaim our democracy, this is how you're going to do it. We're going to do it by voting.
Awesome, thank you. And Stephanie Stevens.
Yeah, I would say, having worked in many, many communities, one of the things that I've heard over the years is the despondent nature of voting in the big presidential race, right? Like, a lot of refugees care very much about foreign policy. And maybe up until this president, I don't think folks have really understood how much influence a president has over that. At the same time, we don't get a vote on which wars we enter and all of this, but we do get a vote for things that are much closer to home. There are all kinds of races on the ballot, not just the president. There's Congress, there's local races, there's gubernatorial races, there's all kinds of folks that are up for election, and it's important to pay attention to those because they may have an even more direct influence over what happens in your schools, how things are funded, lots of different programs. And so I think it's really important that folks remember it's not just about the big races, it's about all the little ones up and down the ballot. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for your insight, for your perspective, your knowledge. This is really, really helpful. And thank you to everyone who joined us this evening on this important conversation. And that will conclude our workshop for this evening. Thank you once again, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, Nada.
Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.